The scream shattered the glass walls of the conference room, sharp enough to freeze my blood. Ashley was clawing at her own skin, eyes wide with a terror that didn't belong in a corporate office. Just 7 days ago, that juice was meant for me. If I hadn't passed it to her, I'd be the one losing my mind right now. My husband, David, froze in the doorway. That afternoon, the last rays of sunlight were filtering through the office blinds when he had pushed the door open. In his hand, he held a glass of orange amber juice, perfectly clear, with cold beads of condensation sliding down the glass. I was staring at an unfinished structural blueprint, my head ready to explode from dozens of technical specs. Drink up, I just made it. I put extra orange and peach in it today, a vitamin boost to keep your skin healthy, he said with that same smooth voice he always used. I looked up and smiled at him, but my eyes lingered on the glass a second longer than usual. The color was too vivid, almost artificial. I leaned in to smell it. The fruit aroma was intense, but underneath it, there was a strange note, very subtle and sharp, like the smell of metal mixed with acid. My heart skipped a beat. "What's wrong?" he asked, watching me with those perceptive eyes of his. "Nothing," I lied. Just that from staring at the computer so much, my sense of smell is extra sensitive lately. It was the 7th day in a row he'd made me a smoothie, a ritual he performed with almost religious punctuality. David is a high-profile CFO. I own an interior design firm. We've been married for 5 years. To everyone else, he's the model husband, attentive, detail-oriented, always making sure his wife drinks enough water or eats right. The problem is, I suffer from a severely sensitive stomach. Acidic flavors are torture for me. The first day, with just one sip, I felt a sharp pain in my teeth and my throat burned. The following days, under his watchful eye, I forced myself to drink a little, and then, when he wasn't looking, I'd dump the rest. Today was no different. Just seeing that shiny glass made my stomach knot up. "Drink it, or it loses the vitamins," David insisted, with a voice that, while soft, didn't allow for refusal. I took the glass and pretended to bring it to my lips just as my phone buzzed. It was my assistant calling to confirm tomorrow morning's meeting. I used the chance to set the glass on the table, and while I talked on the phone, I slid it toward the edge of the blueprint, out of his line of sight. When I hung up, I pretended the design had completely absorbed me, pointing out a detail that needed correcting. He quickly forgot about the juice issue and came over to discuss it. When he left, the glass remained untouched in the corner of the desk, forgotten. That same afternoon, when I got to my own office, I don't know why, but I took the juice with me. Maybe I felt guilty throwing away something that was supposed to be a token of my husband's affection. Passing through the shared workspace, his secretary, Ashley, stood up to say hello. Ashley was very young, pretty, only graduated a couple of years ago, but she worked with an agility that had earned everyone's appreciation. I had noticed for a while that the look she gave David wasn't just that of an employee. I smiled and offered her the glass. "Ashley, David made this smoothie, but it doesn't agree with my stomach. Do you want it? I'd hate to throw it out." Ashley's eyes lit up. She took the glass with both hands like it was a treasure. "Sure, thank you so much. Anything Mr. David makes has to be delicious." I smiled without saying anything else. Through the glass wall of my office, I watched her open the lid and take a long drink with an expression of pure delight. For some reason, in that moment, my heart beat out of rhythm, and a strange, indefinable feeling washed over my chest. Sometimes, your intuition screams at you long before your brain puts the pieces together, a primal warning system we've been trained to ignore for the sake of politeness. From that day on, it became a habit. David kept making me the juice every morning, and I always found an excuse to give it to Ashley. She accepted it happily, suspecting nothing, and even joked about it often. "If I keep drinking the boss's juice, I'm going to get addicted," she laughed. David found out, but he just chuckled, as if he found it amusing to have a new regular customer. Everything went on with terrifying normality, without a single alarm bell. Until noon on the 8th day. I was in a video conference with a client when, from outside, a sharp, gut-wrenching scream broke the silence. The sound sliced through the glass walls, so sharp it froze the blood in my veins. We had to stop the meeting. I opened the door and ran out. The scene I witnessed made my legs almost give out. Ashley was in the middle of the bullpen, her face pale as wax and her hair a mess. She was screaming nonstop while slamming into desks and chairs with uncontrolled force, knocking a computer monitor to the floor where it shattered. Papers flew through the air like a snowstorm. She was staring at her arms, screaming in terror. There's something crawling on me. Don't come near me, don't come near me. She was hitting herself violently, as if she truly felt something repulsive crawling under her skin. Her coworkers surrounded her, paralyzed by fear, not daring to get close. Someone called security and the paramedics. David ran out of his office. When he saw Ashley in that state of madness, I saw it with total clarity. In his look, there was no concern, nor was there pity. What flashed fleetingly in his eyes was panic, deep, repressed panic. I felt a chill run down my spine. The ambulance arrived and they had to restrain Ashley, who wouldn't stop screaming and fighting to take her away. The office was plunged into an atmosphere of chaos and a fear so dense it was hard to breathe. When things started to calm down, I went back to my office and closed the door. That was when I saw it. On the corner of Ashley's desk, there was an empty juice bottle, identical to the ones I received every morning. My hands were shaking. Too many pieces were starting to fit together in a cold, terrifying way. A week ago, the person who should have drunk that juice was me. The person who would have lost their mind today should have been me. That night, David came home very early. He made dinner, cleaned up, and asked me insistently how I was, acting like the perfect husband worried about his wife after the terrible incident at the office. Ashley suffered a severe nervous breakdown. The doctor says it could be work stress. Don't overthink it. He said it with absolute calm. I nodded, pretending I believed him. During dinner, he suddenly asked me, "Lately, have you felt tired, had headaches, or insomnia?" The question made my heart shrink. I looked at him and smiled. A little tired, yes, probably just work. His gaze lingered on me longer than normal, and something very hard to define crossed his eyes. That night, I lay in bed with my back to him, eyes open in the darkness. In my mind, the image of Ashley screaming about invisible creatures kept replaying, and a cold sweat ran down my back. I knew that from that day on, my seemingly perfect marriage had officially entered the shadows. And I also knew I couldn't keep pretending I didn't see anything. I spent the night almost entirely awake. David slept soundly beside me, his back to me, breathing regularly, even snoring softly at times. The dim light of the night lamp drew a warm line of light across his back, transmitting a peace that seemed foreign to everything. Before, that image would have calmed me. I would have hugged him from behind, curled up against his chest, seeking comfort after a rough day. But now I only felt cold. In my head, the image of Ashley screaming in the office and the empty juice bottle on her desk played on a loop. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid. It was just fruit juice. Who would go to the trouble of adding something dangerous to a juice he made every morning for his own wife? But then another question surfaced, slow and sharp as a knife. If there was nothing wrong, why did I notice that metallic smell myself? If it was just work stress, why did only Ashley go crazy? And with such a macabre coincidence, exactly the week I started giving her my juice. I turned slowly and sat up in bed, watching David's face in the gloom. The face in which I once placed all my trust, the refuge I thought I had for life. He was frowning slightly, as if his worries chased him even in his dreams. Suddenly, I remembered the times he had signed documents for me, the times he had reminded me of clauses in company contracts, talking about our assets, about the stocks. "It's so you don't lose out," he had said then. Now, remembering them, those words, once light as wind, weighed like rocks. The next morning, David didn't bring the juice to my office as usual. He just peeked in the door to ask about my schedule for the day, recommended I not think too much about what happened at the office, and left in a hurry. I felt relief, but at the same time, a new uneasiness invaded me. Did he not bring it because he was busy, or because, with the objective only half met, he now had to change strategy? When I arrived at the company, a heavy atmosphere still floated across the entire floor. People whispered, avoiding eye contact when the conversation drifted toward Ashley. A young girl who seemed completely normal, losing her mind in broad daylight at her desk, was something that terrified everyone. I opened my office door, but I didn't sit down immediately. My gaze drifted unconsciously toward Ashley's spot. Her desk had been superficially cleaned, the monitor was new, and the chair was perfectly aligned, everything clean and tidy, as if no storm had passed through there. Only I knew that there, once, stood a bottle of juice. At lunch, while everyone went down to the cafeteria, I stepped out pretending to talk on the phone and circled Ashley's area. I crouched down and opened her desk drawer. Empty. I quickly checked the trash can next to it. Only some crumpled papers and tissues. I pressed my lips together and walked away as if nothing happened. But in my head, I had already made a very clear decision. If I couldn't find the bottle from that day, I had to find another one. A bottle of juice prepared by David, forgotten somewhere. In the afternoon, I called a person I hadn't spoken to on my own initiative in a long time. Sarah, a friend from college who was now a doctor at a major hospital. That evening, I told David I had a dinner with an interior design client and would be back late. He didn't suspect a thing. He even told me to be careful, not to drive too fast, and to call him if anything happened. I nodded, grabbed my purse, and left the house calmly. In my purse, besides my phone and wallet, I carried something else. A small glass bottle, clean, waiting to be filled. I didn't go see any client. I drove aimlessly until I was sure no one was following me, and then I went into a quiet coffee shop near the hospital. I waited there until my phone buzzed. "You can come now, I'm on call." Sarah's voice was as serene as always. In Sarah's small office, I sat across from her with my hands clasped. I realized I hadn't even taken off my coat, and my palms were sweating despite the air conditioning. "What's going on? Tell me," Sarah said, looking at me with the professionalism of a doctor and the warmth of an old friend. I hesitated for a few seconds and finally spoke. "Sarah, if some kind of drug is mixed into fruit juice, is it possible that by drinking it for several days, a person could suffer a nervous disorder, panic, and see things that don't exist? Could you analyze it?" Sarah frowned. "What are you referring to? Did you drink it, or—" I shook my head. "I'm not sure. I just noticed a strange smell, and a person who drank it for several days went crazy in the office. I don't believe in coincidences." Sarah stayed silent for a good while. She was observing me, not just my words, but through my facade, through the fake calm I was trying to maintain. "Did you bring anything?" she finally asked. I opened my purse, took out the small glass bottle, and put it on the table. My voice sounded dry. "Help me, please. If I can, next time I'll bring you a real sample directly from the juice. I know it sounds horrible, but I can't trust anyone anymore." Sarah put on gloves, took the bottle, examined it under the light, and put it back on the table. "Okay, but you have to understand one thing. If it's a common medication, it'll be easy to analyze. But if it's a rare substance without a clear origin or in a tiny dose, it can be very difficult. Even so, I'll do everything I can, and one more thing." She looked me straight in the eyes. "While you wait for the results, and listen to me closely, do not drink absolutely anything you haven't prepared yourself, not even if a family member gives it to you." I smiled bitterly. "You're saying exactly what I fear most." Sarah pulled her chair closer, put her hand on mine, and squeezed it gently. "You've always been a very rational person. If you've reached the point of suspicion, it's because deep down you are more than sure. I won't ask who you suspect, nor force you to tell me anything about your marriage. But if it's the person you live with, you have to stay twice as calm as normal. Don't let anything show." I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. In that moment, I realized how alone I had been for a long time in my own life. Since I got married, I barely saw my friends and rarely shared my true feelings with anyone. Everything was summed up in a few words: fine, busy, normal. It turns out normal has many layers. There is a normal that is seen from the outside and another that is rotting from the inside. Leaving the hospital, I didn't go straight home. I drove slowly through the usual streets, the street that led to the first apartment we rented after getting married, the diner where David took me for breakfast every weekend, the corner where he once hugged me in the rain because I had gotten mad over something silly. In my memories, he was a patient, attentive man who knew how to listen, who knew how to wait. Could that man be the same one putting something in the juice his wife drank every day? I didn't want to believe it, but the image of Ashley screaming wouldn't leave me. When I got home, David was sitting on the sofa. The TV was on, but the volume was very low. Seeing me, he stood up. "Why did you take so long? Was it a difficult client?" I took off my shoes and smiled weakly. "The usual. We had to add some details and it got late." He came closer to me and, smelling the faint scent of disinfectant on my jacket sleeve, he frowned. "Have you been to the hospital?" I froze for an instant. Just an instant, but I knew a man as calculating as him would notice. "Yes, I stopped by to visit an acquaintance who is admitted nearby. Don't worry, I'm fine," I said quickly. David looked at me for a few seconds and then smiled, asking no more questions. He went to the kitchen and came back with a glass of warm milk. "Here, so you sleep better. You haven't been resting well lately." I looked at the glass of milk, and the first thing that popped into my head was, what's in it? I immediately felt horrible. So many years of marriage, and now anything my husband gave me felt like a trap. I forced a normal voice. "I just had coffee with the client. If I drink milk now, it'll sit heavy. I'll leave it for tomorrow, okay?" He didn't insist. He just nodded. "Well, if you're tired, go up and sleep." That night, David went back to sleeping peacefully. I, on the other hand, lay in the dark, hand on my stomach, listening to my heart beat so loud my ears hurt. In the silence of the night, a thought broke through with terrifying clarity. If he really wanted to hurt me, I had been living in danger for a long time without knowing it. 2 days later, Sarah sent me a short message. "Come by this afternoon. It's important." I used the client meeting excuse again. David frowned but said nothing. Maybe, in his mind, I was just a wife somewhat tired from work. A bit sensitive after the shock at the office, but still under his control. I arrived at Sarah's office. Her face was more serious than last time. She didn't beat around the bush. I can't state it 100% because the sample was small and wasn't taken directly from the affected person, but in the sediment I managed to isolate, there are traces of certain substances that act on the nervous system. The dose is very small, but if consumed long-term, it can perfectly well cause disorders, paranoia, insomnia, and increased irritability. I felt my legs give out. The chair was the only thing that kept me from collapsing. Sarah continued, her voice lower. "This substance isn't a medication you can buy at a pharmacy. Its origin is very shady. Normally it only appears in certain studies or on the black market. I assume you understand what I mean by this." I looked at her, my eyes stinging, but unable to cry. "Sarah, if someone gives this to his wife on purpose, and when she starts showing symptoms, he takes her to a psychiatrist and tells a couple of stories, what would happen?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. As a doctor, she knew perfectly well. Finally, she said just one sentence, slow and clear, word for word. That woman would be considered a patient, and her husband would become her legal guardian. In that instant, all the puzzle pieces fit together in my head. The morning juices, his frown when I told him I couldn't drink them, the timely appearance of the juice next to Ashley, the look of panic David let slip before putting his mask of calm back on. Everything formed a single image, a plan to drive his wife insane. I sat there for a long time, listening to the hum of the air conditioning, the soft tapping of Sarah's pen on the table, the beating of my heart that seemed to want to break my chest. Outside, traffic continued to flow. Life went on. But for me, from that moment, there was no turning back. Either I let David lead me like a gentle sheep toward the end he had prepared for me, or I had to be smarter than him, colder than him, and more ruthless than him. "Keep all this, please," I said finally in a low voice. "If someday I can't speak for myself, give these results to the police. It doesn't matter if by then I'm a patient or a crazy woman." Sarah looked at me in silence. Then she nodded. Her hand rested on mine again, squeezing harder than the last time. Leaving the hospital, I looked up at the gray, leaden sky of a Seattle afternoon about to rain. The wind blew my hair back, cold but clearing my mind. The image of David reappeared, along with the phrase he always used when signing a document in my place. "Relax, I'll handle it." I pressed my lips together. Yes, he handled it. He handled it so well he wanted to handle the rest of my life, my assets, my future, with a simple glass of juice. But starting today, he wouldn't be the only one handling things. I was going to start setting up my own game, and in this game, I couldn't afford to lose. From that day, I started living two parallel lives. On the outside, I remained David's normal wife. I went to work in the morning, came home for the dinner he prepared, listened to his office stories, and even smiled occasionally to keep up appearances. I still let him hug me, ask me how I was, put his hand on my forehead when I looked too pensive. But inside, I had built a wall, silent, cold, and thick. Every gesture of his, every word, I observed from a safe distance. David didn't insist on the juices anymore, but he started trying other things: restorative broths, plant milks, even vitamin complexes. "You're very weak. You've lost a lot of weight lately," he'd say, with a look full of concern. "Must be work, honey. I'll balance out soon." I'd smile. Every time he offered me something to drink, I found an excuse to postpone it or just wet my lips out of obligation. One day, I faked a stomach ache. Another, I said I was taking medication and couldn't mix it. David showed no irritation, only nodded slightly, but I realized that every time I rejected it, his gaze darkened for a fleeting instant. So fast that if you weren't paying attention, you wouldn't see it. I also started taking notes. I noted the times he made me something to drink, even my small headaches, even though I didn't drink anything from his hand anymore. I did it all in silence, like someone preparing for a trial whose date is still unknown. Ashley, after leaving the hospital, asked for medical leave. Rumor had it she suffered an acute nervous disorder and needed long-term monitoring. David acted very sorry and even sent her financial aid out of camaraderie. He told me about it with a tone full of compassion. Poor girl, so young and with this problem. Good thing it was caught in time. I listened to him and felt a chill. That night, lying with my back to him, staring at the dark wall, two words resonated in my head: in time. He had just said it was caught in time. Ashley had drunk my juice for exactly 1 week before collapsing. If the one drinking it had been me, where would I be now? In a hospital bed or a room in a psychiatric facility, bound hand and foot because of uncontrollable panic attacks? And the person who would have signed my admission papers would have been David. 3 days later, David told me something that made it clear what phase of his plan he was in. "I think lately you aren't doing very well psychologically," he said during dinner, voice very soft, very slow. "You sleep poorly, you're always pensive. Sometimes it seems like you don't hear what I say. I worry about you." I put down my silverware and looked directly at him. "What are you insinuating? That I'm sick?" David smiled quickly and waved his hand dismissively. No, I'm not saying you're sick, just that you remind me a bit of Ashley before she had the crisis, and I thought maybe we should do a general checkup just to have peace of mind. Not for you, but for me." I felt my heart pounding in my chest. There it was, the first step of the path Sarah had described to me. If I agreed to go to the doctor with him, everything would fall little by little into his hands in a completely legal and justified way. I took a deep breath, trying to keep calm. I am not like Ashley. I'm tired from work, from the pressure of projects, from not sleeping well due to everything at once. You are the person who lives with me every day. You should understand that. David looked at me with an expression halfway between scrutiny and tenderness. Precisely because I live with you every day, I'm scared. It's just a checkup. We lose nothing. I smiled very faintly. If you really worry about me, let me organize myself. When I think I need it, I'll go myself. I don't want this blown out of proportion." David stayed silent for a few seconds. His expression didn't change much, but I clearly felt his patience was being tested. That night, he didn't hug me as usual. 2 days later, I received a call from my mother-in-law. Her voice on the other end of the line sounded very worried. "Honey, David told me that lately you're very tired and not sleeping well. Is it true?" I held the phone, feeling a sudden chill. David had started playing another card, the family. "Yes, Mom, it must be work stress, but I'm fine." My mother-in-law sighed. "I don't know about medicine, but if your own family notices you're different, you should pay attention to it. Why don't you go get looked at one of these days? So I can rest easy. I'm old, and what I fear most is something happening at home and not knowing about it." I bit my lip. Her voice wasn't malicious or calculating, but it was precisely that genuine concern that David was using to corner me. After hanging up, I sat on the bed for a long time, looking at my hands. Suddenly, I understood something crystal clear. David didn't just want to turn me into a sick woman. He wanted to get the whole family on his side. In that scenario, no matter how much I screamed, I would only look like a sick person denying her own condition. The next night, I told David, "This weekend I'm going to see my mom. Her back has been hurting a lot lately." David was a bit surprised. "Why suddenly? Want me to go with you?" I shook my head. "If you're busy, stay. My mom only wants to see me." David looked at me with some unease, but finally nodded. Maybe, in his calculations, I was still under control and there was no need to rush. I went to my mom's house and stayed over. That night, lying next to her, listening to her soft breathing, the familiar smell of old lady balm, the tick-tock of the wall clock in the old house, I felt my heart soften and then shrink with pain. If someday they really locked me in a psych ward, the person who would suffer most would be my mother. The next morning, while my mom went to the market, I called Sarah to meet urgently. In her office, Sarah observed me for a good while before saying bluntly, "You have to be very careful. He has already started involving the family." I nodded. "I know. That's why I want to ask you another favor." Sarah looked at me without asking, with a grave expression. "I need you to give me a complete general checkup, discreetly. If necessary, record my current mental health status. I need proof that I am completely sane." Sarah understood instantly. "Okay, but you have to be sure of one thing. Do you still have enough cold blood to continue this game to the end? That person isn't simple, and when you start to counterattack, it means there will be no turning back." I looked at Sarah and said slowly, "I haven't had a way back since the moment he wanted to turn me into a crazy woman." Sarah filed the results of my checkup. All indicators were normal. I had no nervous disorder, no paranoia, no signs of pathological depression. I was a woman under pressure, but completely lucid. With that information in my hands, I felt relief and bitterness at the same time. It turns out I had to prove I was sane before someone hung the label of crazy on me. That night, getting home, David was waiting for me in the living room. On the table was a stack of papers. "I've made an appointment for you with a specialist next week," he said, with a voice that was no longer as soft as before. "I've already prepared all the documentation." I stood in front of him. I had imagined this scene countless times, but living it for real, I felt a stab in my chest. "You're deciding my life on your own, aren't you?" I asked, very low. David stared at me. "I'm only doing what's best for you." I smiled. This time, my smile was no longer a polite mask, but something so cold it even scared me. "Then, wait a bit. When the day comes, I'll go with you. But what you think is best doesn't have to be." David looked perplexed for a very brief instant before hiding behind his usual calm again. Suddenly, Sarah's words resonated in my head. "When you start to counterattack, there is no turning back." I understood perfectly. Everything was ready. The following week, the atmosphere at home became very strange. David no longer seemed impatient, but he didn't lower his guard either. He took care of me with a diligence that, seen from the outside, would make me seem like the luckiest woman in the world. In the morning, there was a glass of warm water on the nightstand. At night, hot soup on the table. Even going down the stairs, he stood behind me, offering his hand as if he feared I would trip. "You get dizzy often lately. You have to be careful," he said. I nodded, pretending docility, but inside I knew that care didn't come from affection, but from the fear that I would escape his control. The day of the doctor's appointment arrived very quickly. David chose a large private medical center, famous for its psychiatry department. The night before, he fell asleep very early, but I stayed awake. In the dark, I listened to his rhythmic breathing, every inhalation and exhalation as regular as a machine functioning perfectly. I remembered the first years of marriage, in this same room, when I thought I was sleeping next to the safest man in my life. If back then someone had told me David would be the one pushing me into this abyss, I probably would have laughed in their face. The next morning, David drove me. In the car, we didn't talk much. Only when we stopped in front of the hospital, he turned and squeezed my hand hard. "Don't be afraid. I'm here with you." I looked into his eyes. In that instant, my heart trembled slightly, not from emotion, but from a profound sadness. This man kept saying the same tender words of yesteryear, but behind them hid a cruel plan. "Yes, I trust you," I replied in a low voice. Just those 4 words, but I felt David's hand tense up. Maybe even he was surprised. The doctor wasn't the one who had seen me before. David took me to the office of another doctor, younger and with a serious face. He asked me many questions about my sleep, my emotions, my anxiety attacks, about if I heard strange voices. I answered slowly, just enough to seem doubtful. Sometimes I told the truth, other times I was deliberately ambiguous. David, sitting next to me, was always ready to add or correct details, like a husband worried to the extreme. The consultation ended with an appointment for a new visit and a prescription for mild anti-anxiety meds. "She shows symptoms of an anxiety disorder and insomnia. We need to monitor her," the doctor said. David took the prescription, face somber. "Would it be necessary to admit her for observation, doctor?" The doctor shook his head. "We haven't reached that point yet, but the family must watch her closely. It's not convenient for the patient to be left alone for long periods." On the way home, David remained silent. It wasn't until we passed a busy intersection that he spoke suddenly. "I think if this gets worse, you should get admitted so they can watch you." I turned to look at him. He didn't look at me. He had his eyes fixed on the road with a monotone voice, as if discussing a work plan. "I'm still fine," I said. David didn't answer. That night, my mother-in-law called. This time, her voice wasn't just worried, it had a shade of gravity. "Honey, David told me you went to the doctor. Is it true they have to watch you closely?" "It's just insomnia, Mom." My mother-in-law sighed. "I don't blame you, but health is no joke. You are David's wife, the daughter-in-law of this family. If something isn't right, it has to be treated properly. David has spent several nights without sleeping from worry." I bit my lip. David was a master. He didn't need to speak much or force me roughly. It was enough for him to let others voluntarily exert pressure on me. "I understand, Mom. I'll follow the doctor's instructions," I said in a low voice. After hanging up, I sat in silence in my room. Before, maybe I would have felt guilty for worrying others, but now I only saw more clearly that the net was closing around me. Ashley reappeared in David's conversations. He said her family had moved her to another hospital, that her condition was relatively stable, but she remained mentally unstable. I listened in silence, never stopping to wonder if Ashley was truly sick or if, like me, she was acting. One afternoon, Sarah sent me a short message. "Careful, someone has asked the doctor about your history." My heart skipped a beat. I called her immediately, but Sarah just said quickly, "I've already handled it, but you have to be very alert. They are speeding things up." I understood that the fact David took me to the doctor was the first step of that acceleration. That same night, I faked a panic attack. Shaking, I told him I heard invisible knocks on the door, that there was a stranger in the house spying on me. David hugged me immediately, whispering soothing words. But I realized that in his gaze, the worry was no longer pure. It was mixed with something resembling anticipation. After my crisis, David called the doctor in the middle of the night. He spoke very low, thinking I was asleep, but I heard every word. "Yes, her symptoms have worsened. I think we should prepare a plan to admit her soon." I turned over, and tears sprang out. But this time, I wasn't crying from pain, but because the path ahead was no longer blurry. It was drawn with terrifying clarity. A hospital door closing behind my back. The next morning, David brought home a folder full of documents. He left it on the table and said slowly, "I've already spoken to the hospital. We just need one more confirmation from the doctor, and you can be admitted immediately. They'll take better care of you there." I looked at him, voice barely audible. "And my work?" David smiled. "Don't worry about that. I'll handle everything." That phrase froze my blood. Handle everything. For David, my life seemed to be just a file to be managed in an orderly fashion. That night, I called my mom. I lied to her, telling her I had a work trip for several days. I didn't dare tell her the truth. I was afraid that if she knew, she would panic, come running, and fall directly into the trap David had set. Before sleeping, David put a pill in my hand. "Take it, so you sleep better." I took the pill, looked at it for a good while, and swallowed it. But as soon as he turned around, I went stealthily to the bathroom and threw it up. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat leaning against the headboard, watching David sleep deeply beside me. His face, in sleep, looked like that of a good husband, peaceful and serene. I wondered where his true self was hiding, in that warm appearance or in the admission papers he kept in the drawer. At dawn, Sarah sent me a brief message. "You need undeniable proof. There isn't much time left." I gripped the phone tightly. For the first time in many days, I felt a strange mix of fear and terrifying determination. I knew that if I hesitated, that door would slam shut. But if I acted too soon, everything could come crashing down. I had to choose the exact moment, and that moment was very close. The next morning, David got up very early. He dressed impeccably, as if going to an important meeting, but he kept shooting me sideways glances, as if fearing I would vanish in a blink. I pretended I was still tired, lying facing the wall. When he leaned over and put a hand on my shoulder, I shuddered slightly, just enough for him to notice. "Are you still tired?" His voice softened. "Yes, I'm a little dizzy," I said weakly. David didn't suspect. On the contrary, he seemed to get impatient. He called the cleaning lady to give her an endless list of instructions and then turned back to me. "Today, I have to meet with the lawyer for a moment. Stay home and rest. Call me if you need anything." I nodded, docile as always, but as soon as the door closed, I jumped up. My heart was beating at full speed. It was one of the few times David was away from home after days of watching my every step. I knew I only had a brief window of time. I called Sarah immediately. My voice shook with tension. "Sarah, today David went to see the lawyer. I suspect it's to finalize the admission papers and the guardianship of my assets." Sarah was silent for a few seconds and then said firmly, "You need to get at least one more direct proof. Medical reports aren't enough." I bit my lip. The direct proof could only be Ashley, the only person who was both victim and accomplice. That afternoon, I used the excuse of exhaustion not to go down for dinner and asked the housekeeper to bring something up to my room. I took out the prepaid SIM card I had hidden in a drawer. I put it in an old phone and used it to communicate in secret. I still had Ashley's number. She herself had called me several times in the past with a tone between defiant and fawning. I sent her a short message. "I know everything. If you want to keep living peacefully, we have to talk." Almost half an hour later, Ashley replied with a single line. "Don't try anything weird. I have nothing to do with it." I took a deep breath and wrote again. "You're pregnant with David's child, aren't you? The previous hospital doesn't have your records anymore." This time, she took much longer to reply. The message arrived almost at 7 p.m. "What do you want?" I knew I had hit her weak point. I asked to meet her at a small coffee shop on the outskirts, a discreet place. I lied to David, telling him I'd be in a meeting until late, that he wouldn't notice my departure. Actually, I had it all calculated. If David came back sooner, I would leave through the back door of the coffee shop and return home. Arriving, I chose the most secluded table. My hands were freezing and my back soaked in sweat. Ashley arrived almost half an hour late, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a mask. She was thinner, but her belly was clearly showing. She sat across from me, looking nervous and alert. "Why did you call me here?" she asked, voice cutting. I looked directly at her, no beating around the bush. "You faked a madness attack in the office and then disappeared from the hospital. Did you think I wouldn't find out anything?" Ashley paled. She bit her lip and after a few seconds of silence let out a bitter laugh. "You really are sick. Even if I faked it, that has nothing to do with you." I put the phone on the table and played a recording of David's voice, giving her instructions on a call. Sarah had helped me recover it from a device we had installed in his car. David's voice sounded crisp. "You act convincingly. If we get through this, I'll take care of you and the kid." Ashley froze. Her hands were visibly shaking. "I didn't imagine you were so brazen," I said slowly. "You knew exactly what was in the juice he gave me, didn't you?" Ashley lowered her head, trembling from head to toe. A good while later, she broke down crying, voice broken. I didn't have a choice either. I was drowning in debt. Loan sharks had me cornered. David told me if I helped him with one thing, he'd give me money to pay my debts and keep me for life. I thought he just wanted to scare her, not that he would do it for real. I clenched my hands under the table, chest tight. And did you know exactly what that drug was? I insisted. Ashley shook her head, crying inconsolably. I only know it was something to trigger nervous disorders, that over time it would drive you crazy. I was the first to try it, but they gave me something else, something harmless. I closed my eyes. The last piece of the puzzle had fit. Ashley, I don't care if you truly love David or not. I opened my eyes and stared at her. But I'll tell you one thing. If I end up in a psych ward, neither you nor the child you carry inside will be safe. As soon as David gets what he wants, he'll kick you to the curb. Ashley was stunned. She hugged her belly and cried even louder. So what do I do? I looked at her for a long time and then said slowly, if you testify in my favor, I will protect your child and you. If you stay silent, I assure you that you will carry all the blame alone. Ashley stopped crying. She nodded, with a look full of fear and desperation. I activated the mobile recorder and put it in the middle of the table. Tell me everything from the beginning. Ashley told it all through tears. How she met David, the money transfers, how he trained her to fake the attack in the office, how they got her out of the hospital through an unofficial channel. Every word was a dagger in my heart. When she finished, I turned off the recorder. I felt no victory, only a cold that left me paralyzed. Is he going to destroy us both? She asked, trembling. I stood up, with a terrifying calm. If you stand on my side, I will only destroy him. On the way home, the sky had darkened as if it were going to rain. In the car, I listened to the recording again and again, hands shaking uncontrollably. This was the last piece I needed. When I got home, David was already there. He was sitting in the living room, looking tired but with a strange shine in his eyes. Where were you? He asked. I feigned confusion. I went out for a bit to get some air. I felt overwhelmed. David stared at me for a few seconds and then smiled. Tomorrow you get admitted. From now on, you shouldn't go out alone. I nodded slightly. My heart was beating wildly. Tomorrow, the day David planned to lock me behind a door with no exit. That night, lying next to him, I felt a storm inside me. The phone, with Ashley's recording, was under the pillow, the key that opened my path to freedom. I knew I only had one day left. Either I escaped or I would be buried forever under the identity of a mental patient. I barely slept. David was very close, an arm over my stomach, a familiar gesture of the husband who once loved his wife. But now, that contact only gave me chills. I remained motionless, eyes open in the dark, listening to his breathing, every slight movement, as if counting the time I had left. Almost at dawn, David got up before me. He walked in silence, but I still felt his steps. Through squinted eyes, I saw him standing by the bed, looking at me for a long time. His look was no longer of concern, but of a terrifying calm, that of someone contemplating something about to conclude. Sleep well, he whispered, voice soft. I didn't answer. He turned around. As soon as the door closed, I allowed myself to breathe deeply. I knew today was the decisive day. If I let David take me to the hospital according to his plan, I wouldn't walk out on my own 2 feet again. I immediately sent a message to Sarah. Prepare everything as we discussed. They are about to take me. Less than a minute later, Sarah called me. Her voice was firm and calm. I'm on my way to your house with Uncle Frank. Uncle Frank was an old friend of my father who now worked in internal affairs for the police. My father had asked him for help in the past with some business problems. I never imagined that one day I would have to turn to him because of my own marriage. At 9 in the morning, David returned. He wore an impeccable dark suit, as if going to an important signing. In his hands, a thick folder. The car is already waiting, he said, with a soft but firm voice. I sat on the bed, pretending to be scared. Honey, I'm scared. David came closer and took my hand with a tender look. It'll only be a few days. As soon as you're better, I'll come get you. I nodded and got up very slowly. In my head, only one idea. Buy time, every minute, every second. When we went down to the living room, I froze. Sarah was sitting there, and next to her, Uncle Frank. My mother-in-law was also present, face full of worry. David stopped dead for half a second, but recovered his composure immediately. "Sarah, what are you doing here so early?" Sarah stood up with a frigid smile. "I came to take her for a second checkup. There are some things we need to confirm." David looked at me, and a flash of alert shone in his eyes. "I already have everything organized. No need to bother anyone else." It was then that Frank spoke, voice grave and sure. "David, I just wanted to ask you a few questions about your former employee, Ashley." The atmosphere in the living room froze. David frowned slightly, but kept a calm tone. "Ashley is just a former employee who left work due to illness. What does that have to do with today?" Sarah put her phone on the table and played the recording. Ashley's choked voice filled the silence. Every word, every confession, every detail about the theater, the drug, the money, David's plan. Everything was exposed, naked. My mother-in-law held a cup of tea, and her hands shook so much the liquid spilled onto the table. She looked at David, lips trembling. "David, is all this true?" David stood petrified for a few seconds and then laughed, a dry laugh. "That recording could be manipulated. Who knows who forced Ashley to say those absurdities?" I stepped forward, heart racing. "And what about this one?" I played the recording from my own phone. David's voice that night resonated clearly. "Let her try it first. This version doesn't hurt. The one who has to go crazy is the other one." The room seemed to collapse. My mother-in-law's face turned ashen and she stumbled, almost falling. Sarah ran to hold her. My mother-in-law looked at David, voice broken. "Really? Were you really trying to hurt your wife?" David clenched his fists, veins popping on his forehead. His gaze hid nothing anymore. It showed a coldness so stark it gave me chills. "Don't listen to these lies," he growled. Frank opened his briefcase and took out a folder along with a copy of the analysis of the drug Ashley had consumed. "This is the result of Ashley's hair analysis. It contains residues of the same psychotropic substance found in the juice sample. Also, we've spoken to the center that managed her special transfer. The person who signed the authorization is a very close associate of yours." David looked at the papers, and his expression wavered violently. For the first time, I saw him truly lost. "David, say something!" my mother-in-law sobbed. "Do you know what you're doing? You're destroying your own wife." David looked at his mother and then at me. For an instant, I saw a glimpse of remorse in his eyes, but it disappeared a second later, replaced by obstinacy. "So what?" He laughed bitterly. "She knew too much. I couldn't let her keep standing in my way." That phrase was like a knife in my heart, not from surprise, but because I finally heard the truth from his own lips. My mother-in-law broke down crying inconsolably. "My God, so all this time you've been acting in front of me, David?" He turned around, not answering. Sarah approached, voice calm but firm. "David, the evidence is sufficient. If you keep denying it, the only one hurt will be you." David looked at us all for a long time. His gaze faded, like someone realizing they've lost all exits. Finally, he let out a long sigh. "Okay, I lost. But do you think you won?" He looked directly at me. "Do you think after this you're going to be able to live peacefully?" I returned his gaze. For the first time in all this time, I no longer felt fear. I just need to live like a real person, not like the sick woman in your script. Police sirens sounded outside. David startled. Frank had called them discreetly. My mother-in-law covered her face, weeping floods. Sarah squeezed my hand hard. Her hand was warm, but shaking. I stood motionless, watching them put handcuffs on David. I felt no joy, just a strange emptiness. The day we chose each other to marry, I never thought our farewell would be like this. They escorted him to the car. Before getting in, he turned to look at me one last time. In his gaze, in that moment, I saw not only hate, but also a bitter defeat. The car disappeared behind the garage door. I stood in the yard, unmoving. The wind blew cold. My mother-in-law collapsed behind me. I turned to hold her, heart shrinking. My battle was half won. But I knew the consequences, the wounds, and Ashley's fate still waited for me. After they took David, the house, so familiar, felt strangely empty. Everything remained the same: the sofa where he sat, the glass of milk he offered me every night, even his soft cologne still floating in the closet. But the man who had been my husband was no longer there. My mother-in-law sat in a chair, absent, hands pressed against her chest as if fearing her heart would pop out. She cried in silence, only with choked, broken sobs. I knelt in front of her and took her hands, cold and trembling. "Mom, I'm sorry." She looked at me, eyes red from crying so much. "You aren't to blame for anything. It was David. He destroyed his own life." Her voice broke on the last word. Suddenly, in that woman's eyes, I saw not only the pain of a mother losing her son, but also the remorse of not having seen him slipping into darkness. Sarah stayed with me all afternoon. She helped me take my mother-in-law to her room, prepared a sedative for her, and cooked some broth. My mother-in-law barely ate, only drank a few sips of water and kept crying. Every so often she took my hand and said, almost begging, "He made a mistake, honey, but after all, he was your husband. What are you going to do now?" I couldn't answer because I didn't even know myself. 3 days later, I was summoned to testify. Ashley's full testimony, the recordings, the drug analysis results, the illegal transfer documents, everything was laid on the table like pieces of naked lives, nowhere to hide. Ashley was there too. She sat in a corner of the room, thin, belly bulging, face pale. When our eyes met, she broke down crying inconsolably. She asked for my forgiveness again and again, like a scared child clinging to her last hope. "Ma'am, I have no one left. David is detained and the loan sharks are looking for me." I looked at Ashley with a conflicting feeling. I couldn't forgive her, but I couldn't be cruel enough to abandon a pregnant, terrified, desperate woman. "Declare the truth to the police. The law will handle the rest. As for your child, if you need it, I'll help however I can," I said. Ashley collapsed, sobbing. "I don't deserve your help." "I'm not helping you because you deserve it, but because the child isn't to blame for anything," I replied. After that statement, I felt for the first time what it was to be exhausted to the limit. It wasn't physical tiredness, but that of someone who has just crossed the border between life and death. I went back home and let myself fall onto the bed, staring at the white ceiling for a long time, mind blank. That night, my mother-in-law came into my room and sat silently on the edge of the bed. "Do you hate him a lot?" she asked in a low voice. I kept silent for a good while before answering. "At first, yes. I hated him so much I just wanted to forget all the years we lived together. But now, I only feel pain." My mother-in-law broke down crying. "I gave him life. I raised him. And I can't believe I raised someone like that." I took her hand and squeezed it gently. The woman in front of me wasn't my mother-in-law anymore, but simply a mother who had just lost her son in the most painful way. A week later, the lawyer came to handle the assets and divorce. David was charged, and all our joint assets were frozen for the investigation. I signed the divorce petition with a strange sensation. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just felt the sadness of holding something broken in my hands, impossible to repair. While I signed, my mother-in-law stayed by my side, lips pressed tight. When I finished, she suddenly said, "Keep the house. I don't need anything. I don't have the face to discuss anything with you." I shook my head. "It's a joint asset. I won't take anything that doesn't belong to me. And as for you, I'll keep being your daughter-in-law, even if I'm no longer David's wife." She took my hands, crying inconsolably, like a mother losing her own daughter. Ashley was released on bail due to her pregnancy, but under strict surveillance. She came to see me one more time. She was much thinner, with a scared look, but there was no deceit in her anymore. "I'm going abroad after giving birth. I don't dare stay here," she said. "Do you hold a grudge?" I looked at her and replied slowly, "The day you decided to do what you did, you should have thought about the consequences. But at this point, I don't want to hold any more grudges. Live decently from now on, and consider that's how you pay the debt you owe yourself." Ashley bowed deeply, and her tears fell to the floor. A month later, I moved out of that house. I didn't have the strength to stay in a place that was once a home and was now only full of ghostly memories. Sarah helped me find a small apartment near the hospital. My mother-in-law didn't want to go back to her village. She wanted to stay in the city to visit me and wait for news of David. The first night in the new apartment, I stayed on the balcony for a long time, watching the flow of cars passing below like a river of lights. With the cold wind, I felt for the first time the word freedom with crystal clarity. Freedom, but also loneliness. Some nights I still woke up with a start, dreaming of the amber-colored juice, of Ashley's screams, of David's icy stare. But every time I woke up, I told myself it was all over. The wounds were still there, but I had survived. One afternoon while working, I received a message from an unknown number. Just one sentence. "Think you won?" I felt a chill. I didn't need to see the name to know who it was. Sarah saw me go pale and asked, alarmed, if it was David. I nodded, an indefinable unease growing inside me. I knew that, even though David was detained, the bond of hate between us hadn't completely broken, and I understood that my life, after all this, couldn't go back to being as calm as before. But this time, I wasn't the naive woman who let herself be led. I had learned to stand firm in the middle of the storm. David's message haunted me all night. Even though I knew he was in pretrial detention, I couldn't avoid thinking about the possibility that he had people on the outside, connections that hadn't been cut. The fragile peace I had just found wobbled suddenly. Sarah advised me to inform Frank immediately. The next morning, I took the phone to the station. Frank examined it and pressed his lips together. "This isn't a random message. Someone is helping him communicate from inside. From now on, you have to be especially careful." I nodded. What I felt wasn't just fear anymore, but a cold caution. I understood that a man willing to destroy his wife to keep everything wouldn't accept defeat easily. The following days, I changed my routines. I went to work on time, came home earlier, and didn't go out alone at night anymore. Sarah stayed with me often. My mother-in-law also moved into my new apartment, sleeping in the guest room. She didn't talk much, but every morning she got up early to make me a hot breakfast. That woman, who had lived in a wealthy family, now took care of her daughter-in-law in silence, just as she had cared for her son before. One afternoon, while we were peeling fruit, my mother-in-law said quietly, "I went to visit him." My hand stopped. "How is he?" She sighed. "He's thinner, but his look is still very hard. He asked about you, if you were living peacefully." I didn't know what to answer. I kept silent. Deep down, a strange sensation invaded me. After all, David had been my husband. There were years where he really loved me, or at least I thought so. "I told him you were fine. I don't want him to keep clinging to you," she continued, voice choked. But before leaving, he looked at me and said one thing. She stopped, clutching the fabric of her clothes. He said, "You won't have her with you for long." I felt a stab in my heart. I knew David hadn't let me go yet. That night, just as I turned off the light to sleep, the doorbell rang. The sound, in the middle of the silence, was sharp and chilling. Sarah jumped up and grabbed my hand. My mother-in-law also got up, scared. "Who can it be at this hour?" she whispered, trembling. I looked through the peephole. Outside was an unknown man in a cap, head down. I signaled Sarah not to open. The man waited a moment and then banged on the door harder. "Is anyone there? I have a delivery." I didn't answer. A few minutes later, he left. Through the security camera, I saw him leave a yellow envelope on the doormat and walk away quickly. Sarah called the building security. When they brought us the envelope, inside there was only a photo. It was a photo of David and me on our wedding day. My face in the photo was crossed out with a red pen, with strokes that looked like dried blood. On the back, just one sentence written in clumsy handwriting. "This isn't over." My mother-in-law saw the photo and broke down crying, chest heaving. Sarah ran to give her a sedative. I stood paralyzed, like a statue. The fear was still there, but this time it mixed with anger. I called Frank immediately. That same night, he came to collect the envelope as evidence. He looked at me for a long time and said, "Get ready. When people are cornered, they don't always surrender. Some get more reckless than you think." I nodded. I understood it better than anyone. A few days later, Ashley gave birth to a boy. The news reached me on a morning of torrential rain. I received it with a shrinking heart. A new life had arrived in the world, but it dragged the shadow of the adult's sins. Ashley sent me a single message. "He's born. The baby is fine. Thank you." I didn't reply. I didn't know what to say in that situation. That night, I dreamed David was standing in a long, dark hallway with a heavy iron door at his back. He was looking at me, smiling sweetly and saying, "Wait for me." I woke up with a start, soaked in cold sweat. "Get out!" The rain kept falling, every drop hitting like a hammer on my heart. The next morning, while washing my face, the phone rang. It was from the prison. A man's grave voice said, David requests to see you. He says it's a matter directly related to the case." My hands shook. Sarah, next to me, watched me unblinking. "I won't tell you if you should go or not, but if you go, you have to be mentally prepared. Someone like David never talks just to talk." I kept silent for a good while. Finally, I nodded. That afternoon, I went to the prison. The entrance path was cold and long. Through the thick glass, I saw David. He was much thinner, but his gaze remained sharp and deep. Seeing me, his lips curled into a strange smile. "Still living the good life?" he asked. I looked at him calmly. "If you want to apologize, you didn't need to make me come." David chuckled. "Apologize? Do you think I called you just to apologize?" He leaned toward the glass, lowering his voice. "I want to tell you something. Everything you've seen, everything you think you've won, is just the surface. In this world, there are things that aren't fixed with a court sentence." My heart beat hard, but I didn't show it. "Are you threatening me?" David stared at me, eyes darkened. "I'm warning you to be careful with the people you trust, especially Sarah." That phrase was like an icy knife. I was shocked, but kept my voice firm. "You have no right to speak about anyone in my life anymore." David let out a loud laugh that echoed in the empty visiting room. "A day will come when you understand, and then you'll miss me." I stood up without saying another word. I wasn't going to let him see me cry because I understood that for this man, every one of my tears was a victory. Leaving the prison, I stayed for a long time in front of the cold iron gate, breathing deep the freezing air. David's words resonated in my head. "Be careful with the people you trust, especially Sarah." I didn't want to believe it, but he had planted a seed of doubt, and I knew the storm wasn't over yet. Returning from the prison, my head felt heavy, as if I carried a slab on top. David's words repeated in my mind, slow and cold. "Be careful with the people you trust, especially Sarah." I didn't want to believe it. During my darkest days, Sarah had been my greatest support, the one who held my hand in the middle of panic, the one who helped me out of David's trap. But I also couldn't completely ignore the words of someone like him. I got home and Sarah was in the kitchen, making broth. The smell of hot rice and ginger filled the apartment with warmth. Seeing me, she turned and smiled. "You're back? How did it go with him?" I looked at her and for a second felt I was seeing a complete stranger, but it was only an instant. Then, her familiar face returned to being the same as always, with the same worried look. "He said some very unpleasant things," I replied, avoiding her gaze. Sarah left the bowl of broth on the table and pulled out a chair for me. "People like him, the more they fail, the more nonsense they say to confuse you. Don't pay him any mind." I nodded, but inside I wasn't calm at all. That night, I pretended to fall asleep early. When I was sure Sarah had gone to her room, I got up in silence and turned on the old phone I used for my secret communications. I checked the entire history of messages and calls from the last few months. I found nothing suspicious about Sarah, except some very short calls to an unknown number, almost always at dawn, although not very frequently. I didn't dare draw conclusions. I just noted it mentally. A few days later, Frank called me. "Come to expand your statement. New details have emerged about Ashley's illegal transfer." I went to the station in the morning. Ashley was there too. Having just given birth, she looked very weak, face haggard and deep dark circles. Seeing me, she lowered her head. In that session, I learned something important. Besides David, there was another person acting as an intermediary between him and a black market medical network. This person used a prepaid phone and communicated with great discretion. They still hadn't been able to identify them. Leaving, Ashley stopped me, voice hoarse. "Ma'am, The night before I gave birth, someone called me. It was a woman. She asked if I still kept David's recording. My heart skipped a beat. A woman. Did you know her? Ashley shook her head. No, but her voice sounded very calm. She told me not to even think about handing anything to the police or my son wouldn't be safe in the future. I froze. It was a very subtle threat. What did you say? I asked. Ashley was shaking. I hung up immediately and changed my number. I left the station with an increasingly clear unease. David was monitored in prison. So, who was that woman? Why did she know about the recording? And why did she aim directly at the child? That night, arriving home, Sarah wasn't there. My mother-in-law told me she had to take an unforeseen night shift at the hospital. I nodded, but a vague and unpleasant feeling invaded me. I entered Sarah's room. Everything was tidy, as always. Her white coat hanging up, some medical books on the nightstand. I didn't want to turn into a distrustful person, but my hands opened, almost by instinct, the nightstand drawer. Inside, I saw another phone. Not the one Sarah usually used. I picked it up. It didn't have a password. A second later, I saw the recent call list. The contact was saved with a strange symbol. I felt my heart drop into a bottomless well. I didn't dare look at the messages. I put the phone back in its place and closed the drawer as if nothing happened. My whole body was shaking. In my head, two images overlapped. David smiling coldly behind the glass, and Sarah in the kitchen with a bowl of hot broth for me. That night, Sarah came back very late. She was exhausted. As soon as she entered, she collapsed on the sofa. "It was a super long emergency," she sighed. I brought her a glass of water, acting normally. "Are you very tired?" Sarah smiled and stroked my head, like she always did. "A little, but seeing you cheers me up." That caress gave me a chill. Not because it was strange, but because it was too familiar. So familiar it confused me, not knowing anymore what was real and what was fake. A few days later, I received the official notification that David would be tried the following month. I broke the news to my mother-in-law. Hearing it, she went in silence to light an incense stick before her late husband's altar, while tears ran down her cheeks. "If your father knew this from the beyond, what a disappointment he would have, daughter." I said nothing. I only knew that the upcoming trial wouldn't just be the legal end of David, but also the definitive closure of a marriage I once thought solid. That night, I received a message from an unknown number. "Do you want to know the truth about Sarah?" Before I could reply, a second message arrived. "Tomorrow at 3 in the afternoon at the usual coffee shop near the hospital. Come alone." I stared at the screen, heart racing. I knew I was standing before a new door. Behind it, either a truth that would destroy me awaited, or another trap, even crueler. The next morning, I lied to Sarah, telling her I had to meet the lawyer. She looked at me for an instant and nodded. I arrived at the coffee shop on time. It was still a small and quiet place. I chose a table by the window. At 3 o'clock sharp, a woman appeared. She wore a wide-brimmed hat and sunglasses that covered almost her entire face. She sat across from me and took off her glasses. It was Frank's ex-wife. I felt like someone was squeezing my heart. The woman looked at me with a bitter smile. "David wasn't alone in this game, and Sarah isn't as innocent as you think." It took me a few seconds to be able to speak. "What do you mean?" The woman lowered her voice. "It was Sarah who first detected the anomaly in your juice sample, but she was also the one who kept part of the sample and didn't hand it all over to the police." I stood stone still. "That's impossible." She tilted her head with a look full of insinuation. "Think about it. A doctor as brilliant as Sarah. If she were completely innocent, why are there still important details of the case unexplained in the file today?" I froze, silent. I heard a ringing in my ears, as if all sounds around me had disappeared. The woman stood up. "The truth isn't always easy to digest. You should ask yourself who wins in this whole story." She left, leaving me alone in the empty coffee shop, heart aching as if it had just been torn out. In my mind, Sarah's image appeared with brutal clarity. Her hand on mine, her hugs when I broke down, her voice calming me on nights of despair. If what that woman said was true, to what extent had I misjudged a person? I held the phone, looking at Sarah's name in my contact list. Suddenly, I realized this game might never have been just between David and me, and that the person pulling the strings at the end could be much closer than I imagined. I walked out of the coffee shop like an automaton. The afternoon sky was gray and leaden, and the cold wind hit my ears without me feeling anything. The woman's words rumbled in my head, heavy and painful. Sarah kept part of the sample. She didn't hand it all over to the police. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't dare believe it. Because if it was true, it meant that all the time I thought I was being rescued, in reality, I was just being guided through another labyrinth, more subtle and sophisticated. I got home when it had already gotten dark. Sarah was in the kitchen washing dishes. Hearing the door, she turned and smiled. "You're here? What did the lawyer say?" I looked at her for a long time. For the first time, I had to suppress my emotions with such force that my whole body went rigid. That face, that smile, for years they had been so familiar to me. If everything was fake, I didn't know what was real anymore. "The usual," I replied, voice dry. That night, I barely tasted a bite. Sarah asked if I felt sick. I just shook my head. My mother-in-law observed me attentively. She noticed the strangeness in my gaze, but asked nothing. When everyone fell asleep, I stealthily opened my phone and sent a very short message to Frank. "Uncle Frank, I suspect Sarah. I need you to investigate her." Less than 10 minutes later, Frank called me. His voice was grave. "Explain it better." I told him every detail. The meeting at the coffee shop, the strange phone in Sarah's drawer, the nocturnal calls I had discovered, and his ex-wife's words. On the other end of the line, there was a long silence. "Don't reveal anything you know," he said finally. "It's not clear yet, but if she truly is implicated, she isn't a simple person." "Okay," I whispered, heart shrinking. From that day, I started acting in a new play, this time with Sarah herself. I behaved normally, ate with her, talked to her, even let her take care of me like before. But inside, I had raised an invisible barrier. Every word she said, every gesture she made, I watched with different eyes. 3 days later, Sarah told me she had to take a short work trip to another state. I nodded, feeling both relief and fear. As soon as she left, I entered her old apartment with Frank to search it. Frank was very meticulous, checking every drawer, every electronic device. The phone I had seen in Sarah's drawer had disappeared. Frank frowned, face somber. "She's had time to get rid of it." I dropped onto the edge of the bed, heart beating so fast I felt dizzy. My suspicions were no longer unfounded. That night, Frank put someone to watch Sarah from a distance. 2 days later, he called me. His voice was heavy as a stone. "Get ready. Sarah has contacted David's personal lawyer." I gasped. "What for?" "We don't know the full content of the conversation, but a large sum of money has just been transferred to an account in the name of a relative of Sarah's through an intermediary. It looks like a payment for her silence." I felt like I was drowning. It turns out not only David, but also the person I trusted most, was part of that network. When Sarah returned, she carried the same tired air as always. She brought me fruit from her trip. "I saw a scarf that would look great on you," she said, smiling. I took it and returned the smile. But inside, every fiber of trust was breaking in silence. That night, I didn't sleep. I waited for Sarah to be deeply asleep and discreetly turned on the small surveillance camera Frank had installed in the living room. Near 1 in the morning, Sarah came out of her room. She walked on tiptoes, phone in hand. She stayed on the balcony for a good while. I couldn't hear what she said, but I saw her nod and shake her head repeatedly, and then crouch as if listening to someone intently. When the call ended, she stood motionless for a while before returning to her room. I clutched the blanket, and tears started to fall without me noticing. Not from pain, but because the last trust I had left had just shattered. The next morning, I confronted Sarah with a completely different attitude. This time, I wasn't going to run away. "Sarah," I called her. "Who did you call last night from the balcony?" Sarah stopped for an instant. Very quickly, she recovered her composure. "I called my family, for a personal matter." I looked her straight in the eyes. "What family? Your whole family is here." Sarah seemed uncomfortable and forced a smile. "An old acquaintance." "Who is named David, right?" I asked directly. Sarah's face went pale. She stayed silent. For me, that silence was the clearest answer. You received money from him, right? My voice became hoarse. Sarah lowered her head for a second and then broke down crying. Do you think a doctor like me can't have a moment of weakness? She said, choked by tears. I had debts. My ex-husband abandoned me and I had to raise my son alone. David promised me that if I helped him by keeping a small part of the sample as a last resort, he would ensure my son had a good education. I made a mistake, but I never thought things would go this far. I sat down, feeling my body empty of strength. Do you know that if they had really locked me in a psych ward, my life would have ended? I said, every word like a wound. Sarah covered her face, crying inconsolably. I know, I regret it so much, but at that moment I thought David just wanted to scare you to keep the assets, not that he would actually hurt you. I stood up. For the first time, I had to use all my strength to keep calm in front of someone I had considered my savior. Sarah, you betrayed me the moment you decided to keep that sample. From now on, I said slowly, I will let the law judge your words. That same day, I handed Frank all the new evidence. Sarah was summoned to testify. When they took her away, she turned to look at me, with eyes full of remorse and desperation. I'm sorry. I didn't answer. There are apologies that, even if spoken, cannot undo what has been lost. That night, I sat alone in the silent apartment. My mother-in-law had gone back to her village for a few days to clear her head. I looked at the room that was once my refuge, and now felt as empty as my own heart. It turns out the storm doesn't only come from the enemy, but also from those in whom we place all our trust. The phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You did the right thing. The game is about to end. I looked at the screen, heart beating hard. I knew the upcoming trial would not only close David's case, but would reveal the true face of all the people hiding in the dark. The trial was set for a drizzly morning. I woke up very early and stayed for a long time in front of the mirror. The woman I saw was thinner, with a tiredness in her gaze she couldn't hide, but also with something stronger in her. I knew today wasn't just the day David would face justice, but also the day I would officially close a chapter of my life. My mother-in-law had arrived from the village the night before. She barely slept, staying seated next to me almost all night. In the morning, she took my hand. Don't be afraid. Whatever happens, Mom is here, she said with a hoarse voice. I nodded. In that moment, I realized that the person who had remained by my side most consistently wasn't a friend or an ally, but the mother-in-law I had silently blamed for so long. I arrived at the courthouse with Frank. It was raining and cold. Inside, the atmosphere was dense and heavy. Ashley was brought as a witness. She hugged a small bag against her chest, thin and scared. Her baby was with someone else in the hallway. Sarah was there too. When she saw me, she lowered her head, not daring to look at me. I didn't avoid her gaze, but I didn't seek it either. Between us, there were no more reproaches, just a frozen void. David was the last to enter. He wore the prison uniform, much thinner, but with his back still straight. When our eyes met, he stopped for an instant and then pressed his lips together and looked away. I saw not a shred of regret in his eyes, only the resignation of defeat and a contained rage. The trial began. All evidence was presented. The drug analysis, Ashley's illegal transfer documents, the money transactions, the recordings between David and Ashley and between David and Sarah, and her confession about the hidden sample. Every detail was a hammer blow. They called Ashley to testify. She spoke through tears, recounting everything from when she met David until she was blackmailed and forced to follow his plan. Mentioning her son, her voice broke. I made a mistake, but my son isn't to blame. The room went silent. Then it was Sarah's turn. She took the stand with a pale face. Every word of her confession was like broken glass, wounding me and her own professional ethics. When the judge asked if she wanted to say something to me, she turned toward me, eyes full of tears. I'm sorry. I didn't deserve to be your friend, much less your doctor. I neither nodded nor shook my head. I stayed motionless, looking ahead. Finally, David stood up with a terrifying calm. I admit the charges, but I don't regret it. There was a murmur in the room. My mother-in-law trembled, clinging to the bench not to fall. David turned toward me and continued slowly. I only regret having failed. A chill ran down my back. In that instant, I understood that this man had never considered himself guilty. It only hurt him not to have achieved his goal. The sentence was handed down after almost 3 hours. David received a very severe sentence for multiple crimes. Sarah was barred from practicing and sentenced to prison with a suspended sentence and community service. Ashley received leniency for her cooperation and for being the mother of an infant. When the judge finished speaking, the room seemed to release a breath held for months. They took David away. Passing by my side, he stopped for an instant. Between us was a tiny but impassable space. You won, he said in a low voice. I looked at him and, for the first time, answered him with calm and clarity. No, the one who lost was you, against yourself. David stood paralyzed a second before they took him away. My mother-in-law collapsed in the hallway. I hugged her while she sobbed like a child. I thought giving him life was the greatest happiness, and it turned out to be the greatest tragedy. I didn't know what to say. I just hugged her tight. The following days, the news flooded the papers. They called it the poisoned juice case, the plan to incapacitate his wife and rob her. I chose silence. I was exhausted. Ashley came to see me with her son once. The baby slept peacefully. I looked at him with a strange mix of feelings. I'm leaving the city, she said. I don't dare stay. I nodded. Between her and me, there would always exist the memory of a shared tragedy. Sarah was sent to serve her sentence. Before leaving, she sent me a letter. I didn't open it immediately. There are apologies one doesn't have the strength to read. One afternoon, I went with my mother-in-law to the cemetery to visit her husband's grave. She stayed a long time in front of the headstone, crying in silence. Dear, I didn't know how to raise our son well. Behind her, listening to the cold wind, I understood that everyone in this story had been victims in their own way, but that didn't erase the guilt. A month later, I sold the old apartment and moved to another city to start over. My mother-in-law didn't accompany me. She wanted to stay close to where David was. The day of my departure, she took my hands. From now on, live for yourself. Don't let this family's debts tie down your life. I hugged her, and my tears wet her shoulder. On the train, taking me away from the city, I saw the familiar streets falling behind. The painful memories were also falling behind. They didn't disappear, but they no longer suffocated me. I didn't know what the future held. I only knew I was alive and could start over from the ruins. And that was already a form of luck. The new city welcomed me with a windy morning and a pale sun, neither too strong nor too gloomy, just like my mood. I rented a small room in an old building with a balcony overlooking a tree-lined street. For the first time in many years, I truly lived alone. Without David, without watchful eyes, without juices tasting of metal, just me and the silence. The first days I barely spoke. I went to work at a small design studio, came home, cooked something simple, read, and slept. Life passed so slowly that sometimes that calm scared me. Some nights I still dreamed of David. I woke up soaked in sweat, but told myself they were just sequels of the past. My mother-in-law called me from time to time. I still visit him every month, she told me. He isn't so arrogant anymore, but he barely speaks. I guess his conscience isn't calm either. I didn't answer. I no longer had the strength to feel compassion or anger for David. One day, I received the first letter from Sarah from the reintegration center. She told me of her fall, the scorn of her former colleagues, and the remorse that wouldn't let her sleep. I hope you keep moving forward and live your life fully, she wrote. Consider what I did to you as a nightmare that has passed. I folded the letter. I no longer felt rage, just a deep sadness for someone who had destroyed herself. Time passed. My work stabilized. I started to feel safe. One day, Frank called me. Are you okay? Yes, Uncle Frank, thanks. There's news about David, he said with a grave voice. He has requested to see you. My heart didn't panic anymore, but it trembled slightly. The decision is yours, Frank said. But I think now you are strong enough to face him if necessary. I hung up and stood thinking. If I met with David, it would be the last time I let the past touch my life. The next morning, I sent a message to Frank. I'll go see him. A week later, I returned to the city. The road to the prison was as gray and cold as before, but this time I traveled it with calm. David, on the other side of the glass, was much thinner, with a tired look. "Thanks for coming," he said. "Say what you have to say," I replied, serene. "I don't ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it," he said after a long silence. "I just want to say that inside here, for the first time, I felt fear. Fear of myself." I didn't answer. "I thought if you disappeared from my life, everything would be perfect. But when I lost everything, I realized I had lost much more than I thought." I looked at him, feeling only a slight sadness, like what you feel seeing the ashes of an extinguished fire. "What you say now changes nothing," I said. "I know. I just want you not to live the rest of your life hating me." I looked him straight in the eyes. "Don't worry. I don't hate you anymore, but I don't feel anything for you either." David closed his eyes slowly, and a tear slid down his cheek. I stood up. "This is the last time I come. Starting today, our lives separate completely." He didn't try to keep me. Leaving the prison, I breathed deep. The sky was cloudy, but it wasn't raining. I felt as if an old padlock had opened in my chest. That night, back in my small apartment, I opened the balcony to let the wind in. I made myself a cup of hot tea and sat, watching the yellow light on the empty wall. For the first time in many years, I felt true peace. There was no one watching me anymore, no one manipulating me, no one deciding my destiny for me. Just me, a woman who had walked among ruins to learn to live again. And I knew that, although the road ahead wouldn't be easy, this time I would walk it on my own feet. And that, for me, was enough. There are paths in life we must walk through tears, fear, and desperation to understand something simple. No one can live for us, and no one has the right to control our destiny more than ourselves. My life fell into the abyss of betrayal, pushed to the edge of sanity and madness by the person I trusted most. I thought I would never escape, that I was weak and submissive. But in the end, I stood up, not by a miracle, but by something very human. Conscience. When it all passed, I understood that suffering isn't as terrifying as living permanently in it. Hate isn't as fearsome as letting it consume your soul day after day. What saved me wasn't revenge, but the decision to let go at the right moment, to abandon the darkness when I still had the strength to walk toward the light. The world is full of people with kind faces and calculating hearts, full of traps wrapped in love and care. But in the middle of it all, the most important thing is to maintain our own boundaries. From my story, if there is one thing I wish you'd remember, it's this. Never hand over your destiny completely to anyone, no matter how close they are. Trust is necessary, but blind trust is a danger. Always listen to your intuition because sometimes a small unease is the first sign of a storm approaching. Life taught me that rising from the ruins doesn't make you weaker, but much stronger. We can't choose where we are born, nor all the trials that will touch us, but we can choose how to face them. However deep the pain has been, don't let it chain the rest of your life. Learn to forgive yourself first before thinking about forgiving others. If you are in a relationship that makes you feel fear, suffocation, control, or loss of identity, please stop. Look at the truth head on and have the courage to get out. No one is born to be a victim. You deserve to live a safe, free, and peaceful life. Today, do something small for yourself. Listen to your heart. If there is still fear, look for someone to share it with. If there is still a dead end, look for another path. Don't wait until it's too late. Because true happiness doesn't consist of depending on someone to exist, but in being strong enough to stand on your own, even after life's deepest wounds.